Hi everyone, welcome to the latest in our FEDSA online talks. Very glad to have you all here. As usual, a couple of things just to go through before we start. First of all, to thank our sponsors, longtime sponsors, NML and IO Digital, both software development and design companies in Cape Town. Been sponsoring us for many, many years, and we wouldn't be able to do this without them. So please go and check them out. Then also Code Capsules, which I like to describe as kind of South Africa's answer to Netlify. Check them out. Cloud hosting platform, very, very nice platform. They very kindly sponsor all the workshops that we run. And then related to that as well, CodeSpace Academy, a teaching and learning institution also in Cape Town, and they give us their space for all the workshops that we run. So again, very grateful to all of our sponsors who allow us to keep bringing you these events. A couple of upcoming things. We have a follow-up to our modern CSS workshop. There's coming up on the 26th of August. In that one, in the previous one, we looked at things like container queries and custom properties and logical properties and so on. In this one, we're going to look at layers, nesting, scroll transitions, and new color spaces, amongst some other things. So if CSS is something you're interested in, I encourage you to attend that. Still spaces open. Check that out on Meetup. And then, as you know, we have a partnership with ZAPD, the South African Product Designers Organization. And we have another talk coming up from them, which is around UX research in healthcare, which will be with Chris Metcalf, who's the founder and principal of a UX research company called How Might We, and that will be on Monday, the 28th of August, and that will again be a talk scheduled live on YouTube as usual. Right, now the last thing you'll hear from me is just to say for tonight's talk is by Frikkie Snyman. Very grateful for him to giving us his time on React Native, a beginner's adventure. Before I hand over to Frikkie, he'll introduce himself and run us through about who he is. If you have any questions, please just post them in the live chat. They do come through to us here, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go through the talk, and then we will deal with all the questions at the end. Okay, thanks very much. I'll hand over to Frikkie for the talk for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. It's really cool to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. And it also seems like there's quite some cool stuff coming up for FEDSA in general. So excited about those. All right. Yeah. So I think I started sharing my screen. I'll just wait for it to pop up on the broadcast. Yeah, there we go. All right, yeah, so my name is Frikkie. As I mentioned, it's very, very nice to be here. And I will be introducing you all to React Native. I've called it a beginner's adventure because hopefully as you embark on this career as like a React Native developer, you'll soon come to realize that mobile app development is as much of as an adventure as it is a career. So I'll quickly give you an overview of what we'll be discussing tonight. So firstly, we're going to take a look at what exactly is mobile app development. Then we'll look a bit at cross-platform development and how that ties into this mobile app development. Then we'll dive into React Native. And then lastly, I'll give you some further reading that you can do on your own time. So, but of course, who am I? So my name is Frikkie Snyman. As you can see, I like riding bikes. I've been working at Relive since 2018. Now, Relive is like an outdoor tracking app. We've got around 18 million registered users right now. So I've been there since 2018. I initially started as a full stack engineer, and then I progressed into the position as a tech lead. And for the last year, I've been working as a mobile platform engineer. So, of course, having been with Relive for 4 years at the time, I've built up a lot of tech debt. And now, for the past year, I've been trying to pay off that tech debt and deliver a product that's the best in class. On the side, I also don't only like to play around. So I've also created Puck, which is me trying to understand how game engines work and if that's possible in React Native. So it was quite a cool experience. More recently, I've played around with learning SvelteKit and Supabase, and I've created a nice peer-to-peer payment solution called Splirit. So that's going quite well. Feel free to also check that out. Okay, so getting into it. So what is mobile app development? So if you're going to be Googling, define mobile app development, you'll probably get a definition along the line that says like it's creating software that's used on smartphones, tablets, assistants, etc., etc. I've taken the liberty to come up with my own definition for it. So I say it's creating software that runs on devices without the need of a browser. What I really say is it's creating software that needs to be reviewed by the app stores and Play Store before being hotfixed, that runs on shitty devices at the biggest protest of those devices, operating systems. So remember how I mentioned this is an adventure, so I hope that this definition makes that clear. But okay, if we're going to be talking about mobile app development, we first also need to understand why is this important. So looking at some recent research that was done, specifically on Android users, it shows that 92% of users spend their times on their phones while using an app, compared to only 8% that's being spent in the browser. So of the total time spent on mobile devices, 92% of that is spent in apps. So clearly then users value a catered experience over a generic web-based experience. In contrast to this, so conversely, we don't see this divide being matched in the code that is being written today. So on the chart here, you can see the number of downloads for React DOM compared to the number of downloads for React Native. Now, React DOM you'll generally be using when you're building a website. And the discrepancy here is that React DOM is being used around 12 times more than React Native. So this, of course, is a bit of a simplified insight, but it does serve us well enough as a proxy. And it's quite clear that there's a bit of an elephant in the room here when it comes to what users want versus what we are providing them with. So now, when it comes to mobile app development, we have a couple of options of how we can create mobile apps. So the first one being we can create these apps natively, or as you've guessed, we can also create them using cross-platform development. Native development, what I'm typically talking about is Android development. So you can see here, this is like straight up Java code, something that looks scary, quite backendy. On iOS, it gets even scarier. This is, I think, Objective-C code. So both native on Android uses Java or Kotlin, and on iOS we have Objective-C or Swift. Now there is some good parts to native development. So the first one being it's performant. Now some people like to say it is performant. I don't necessarily think this is true because you can write shitty code natively as well, but you just don't have a framework to blame for it. And since you are working with native constructs, you end up with an app that feels native. Again, this is not something that is unique to writing native code, but we'll touch upon this further later. And then lastly, creating native applications has the upside that platform native features are easily accessible. Things like a dynamic island or Face ID, for example. On the other hand, native apps, if you're talking about the bad parts, they're simply more expensive to create and maintain. If you want your app on both Android and iOS, you now need at least 2 teams to maintain it. Now, generally, these apps should have the same functionality across platforms. So this means you're likely to end up with duplicate business logic, which is always a bad idea. And lastly, your engineers that are working on these apps end up being quite nichely skilled. They don't easily context switch to do full stack work using some shared technologies such as JavaScript. Maybe your Java devs can do it, but then Java backend code is also something else. So yeah, these are some of the most obvious bad parts to native development. Now, on the other hand, we have cross-platform development. Now, some examples of cross-platform technologies are Ionic, Cordova, Flutter, and then, of course, React Native. Now, there are a lot of pros and cons to consider when it comes to working with cross-platform. So I'm also mentioning these good parts now with like a React Native tinted glasses on. So the first good thing, most obviously, it's a much more cost-efficient approach. In general, you can get away with one team that develops the same app on multiple platforms. Now, in the same vein, this also allows us to iterate comparatively quickly with features like hot reloading or over-the-air updates. And then lastly, due to the shared code base, cross-platform just leans itself towards promoting reusability. Business logic and types live in the same code base for all platforms, and rendering logic and display components are shared across these platforms too. So, of course, we need to look at the bad parts. The first one here being performance. Again, I don't really agree with this. Probably 95% of apps won't run into any performance limitations due to whatever limitations of the frameworks, especially talking about React Native here. Debugging can be a bit tough though, especially when it comes to doing things like memory dumps and looking at stack traces for native crashes. And then lastly, framework updates can sometimes be a pain, especially with something like React Native that is actively being developed. For example, we've had to switch from using JSC to Hermes as JavaScript engines, and these things can be quite laborious. Now, this brings me to React Native, the topic of tonight's talk. So as you'll hopefully have noticed, I'm a bit of a fanboy, but I have good reason, and so do others actually. So React Native is 21% of the top sports apps on the App Store. It's also 24% of the top food and drink apps. It's 22% of the top finance apps. It's 25% of top shopping apps, and it's 20% of the top medical apps. So what's clear from this, it's obviously quite easy to create apps that do very well using React Native. Now, React Native is truly native, and it uses native constructs to render the UI. As you can see here, this is an image I've taken from React Native's website, but essentially what is being rendered here, so you can see the text and the view, etc. That's all being mapped to actual native UI constructs provided by the OS. It's therefore very easy to create an app that feels and behaves native on both Android and iOS. But how does React Native actually work? So once the app is launched, a native process is kicked off. It's important to understand that React Native is an actual native app. So once the native process is underway, it launches a JavaScript virtual machine or engine. So this could either be JSC or Hermes, or I've even seen some people using V8, which is used in Node as a JavaScript engine. So you can get quite interesting situations here. Now, this JavaScript VM, once it's launched, is then used to evaluate our JavaScript bundle. Now, this is the bundle that is a result of the React code that we've written. Now, during this JavaScript bundle evaluation, all of the top-level imports and statements are executed, and then finally our root component is mounted. If this doesn't make sense or it's a bit in the air, just hang in there. We'll get to a code sample quite soon, and then I'm sure it will make sense. Now, once the JavaScript has taken over, communication between the JavaScript layer and native layers occur using the so-called bridge. Now, the bridge is what allows React Native to employ the use of true native functionality. So I'm simplifying it quite a bit here, but the bridge essentially stringifies and decodes data between the two layers, which enables communication to take place. Now, the bridge is also then is also the part of React Native where we can run into some performance-related trouble. Since we're stringifying data, it can get slow if you're trying to parse a massive amount of data. Again, this is not something that you'll often run into, but it's good to stay aware of it. So I quickly want to take a look at the React render lifecycle, or as I like to call it, the anatomy of a component. So React Native, of course, uses React, which is why I'm just calling this the React render lifecycle, because it's applicable on both sides. But here we just have some component, and it simply returns hello world, a text component which is wrapped inside a view. Now, a view in React Native is essentially a div, as you would find on a web, and text is essentially a P element. Now we can add state to this component. So here we can make use of what's called a hook in React, where we just add a count, and then that along comes with a setter, so you can change the state. And then rendering it, you'll get a 0 in this case. Now we can also do stuff on mount. So React provides us with what we call use effects. Now, a use effect will fire once the component is mounted, and it will run the code that's in that anonymous arrow function. In this case, we're just setting a timeout, and it'll increase the timer. It'll increase the counter by 1 every 1 second. And then the last thing that I want to touch on is that we can also then do stuff on unmount. So with the previous example, if this component was to be unmounted, then the timeout would still run. However, if you make use of this cleanup function, as they call it in React, where you just simply return something in the use effect, you can do some cleanup code, and this will be executed as the component is physically unmounted. So in this case, we can just clear that interval or that timeout that we've set. So now we will get to the fun part. So we're going to do a bit of a code demo. So we're going to be using Expo Go. Now, Expo is basically a wrapper around React Native. They've abstracted a lot of the complexities away, and they've made it really simple to get an app running and building on it. And they've also provided great services under EAS that you can use to actually build and ship to the app stores. Then we're also going to be using GlueStack, which is a component library. I don't want to be struggling with making things look pretty. So we'll just use that for convenience sake. We'll also be using React Navigation. This helps us to do native navigation transitions, as you'll see in the demo. And then I thought it would be fun to implement the Hacker News API. So if you don't know what Hacker News is, I'll quickly try and show it to you. So Hacker News is essentially this website, which is just a bunch of articles that gets posted. And it's essentially just links to articles. So we're just going to be building a reader app for that. I cannot see your faces, but if I could, I'm sure you're all very excited for this. So I will go to my code. And then, yeah, what we're seeing here is on the left-hand side, of course, you're seeing the code. On the right-hand side, you're seeing an Android emulator and an iPhone simulator. On the bottom, you can see a terminal that's running. This is called, what's being run here is called Metro Bundler. So during development, React Native actually launches a server that continuously bundles the JavaScript and then serves it to the app that's listening to it. So you can see if I make a change here and I save it, you can see the bundling happens again, and then both apps get a hot reload, and you can see the changes that I've made. Cool. So let's dive into it. So as I've mentioned, we want to build essentially a Hacker News reader website or reader app. So the first thing that we need to understand is how does the Hacker News API work. Now, I've taken the liberty to prepare, but essentially the Hacker News API returns us just an array of numbers for the top stories. And then for each of those numbers, we do have to make a separate call to get like the details. So it's a bit of a silly API. It's not super pleasant to work with, but it is what it is. And I'm sure there's better ways to deal with this API instead of making GET calls, but I don't want to complicate it much more than that. But that's essentially all you need to know to understand what we're doing here. So we're We're going to be making a call to get the top stories. That's basically the front page list that you saw there. Then we get just a list of numbers, and then we'll do separate calls for each of those numbers that we get to get the item, which essentially contains more details around it. So let's dive into it. So what we do want to do is we want to, on mount, we want to get a list of those IDs that we need, correct? So we'll do this. So we'll get our IDs. And we're going to have to pass that into some state. And we can import that here. So now on mount, we're going to be making a call to get the top stories. And then just for the demo purposes, I'll just render it in this text element. I think that should work. Oh, of course it doesn't. That's okay. We can map this to a string. And then hopefully it shows up. Oh, of course I need to assign this. So we can say this is the top stories. Of course, this is a promise. So we need to await it. So we say this is stories. And then we can just set the IDs to stories. There we go. Of course, this is all gibberish right now, but we're getting started.
Frikkie, someone's just asked if you can bump the text size up a bit in your editor.
Oh, yeah, sure. Is that a bit better?
Yeah, that looks good. Thanks.
Okay, I'll just continue. Just give me another shout if it's too small. Okay, so of course this doesn't look too nice, but at least we've got something. So now let's start to make this look nice. So the first thing that we'll want to do is we want to build a list that contains this. So we'll make use of flat list that's provided by React Native. So flat list is essentially a native scrollable list, because this is like a very common pattern that you'll use in apps. It's just rendering a list of data. So we'll pass in the IDs, and then we'll pass in a render item. So now if we change this, of course, it'll break again. What's wrong with this? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, it's imported from the incorrect library. So always important to make sure your imports are correct. So we can just take that away. We can import from React Native, set the render item to just do that. And there we go. On the Android side, things are looking well. On iOS side, things are now also rendering as a list of numbers of IDs. So now let's actually make this render like a title and an author. So remember how I mentioned that with this API we need to make a separate call to get the details. So we're gonna create a component and we'll call it, let's say, the Hacker News item preview PXS. So this is simply a function item preview, and we'll give it some props. So it'll take an ID, which is a number. And now we do want to create reusable code, so we'll introduce a hook. So we'll make a hooks folder. We'll call this use item. Now hooks are essentially components in React that just do not they do not return a component. So you can use all of the state elements by it, but it just doesn't render anything. So this is super convenient, as you'll see in a moment. So we can use, we'll call it use item. It takes a number. And then this simply puts an item in state. So we have use state act, and then unmount. It's a call to get the item from Hacker News, and then we'll set that item, and then we can return the item. So what will happen here is that upon adding this hook to your component, it'll call get item on mount, and then it'll return that item, which is now in state. So while the initial call is being made, this item will be null, and as soon as this call returns, we're setting that item, and then we'll return an actual item that we can render. Now, using that in our component, we can then do simply this. So now we have access to that item. Need to pass in the ID, of course. So now we can say if there's no item, then we can return a spinner. We'll make it small. And if not, then it means we do have an item, and we can simply display it. So what I do want to show here is how we'll be using GlueStack. So GlueStack is the component library that I spoke about earlier. So to get that going, you just need to install it and just wrap your component in this GlueStack provider and pass along a theme, so you can do some customization and so on. But basically, this just allows the rest of your app to then, if you're using these components from GlueStack, to know what they should look like, etc. So yeah, continuing here, this means we do have an item, and then we can put this inside a vertical stack, as it's called in GlueStack. We'll give that a flex of 1. And then I'm not going to take you through the laborious stuff here. I'll just copy and paste some code that I've already written. And I will import all the missing stuff. And this one should come from GlueStack. There we go. So what I've done here is we've created a preview item. It renders it in a vertical stack. Inside that, we're rendering the item score on the left-hand side. We'll add a nice divider, and then we'll render the item's title. Then next to that, or underneath that, we'll render the type of the item, and we'll say who the author is. And then on the right-hand side, we'll just print the date so that you know when this was posted. So now back to our list. Now, instead of just rendering a text item, we can now then quite nicely render this preview item. Here we can do the HN item preview, and we give it the ID from the item. Well, the item is the ID. So let's see how that looks like. So now it's loading, and there we go. So now we actually have more than just IDs being rendered. So this is quite cool, right? As you can see, there are a bit of differences between the two platforms. I'm not entirely sure why Android is rendering like this, but iOS looks quite nice. So now we do want to make our app a bit more than this. So, you're scrolling around, you want to be able to at least pull down to refresh, right? So you wanna know if something new comes in. So in order to do that pull down to refresh, we'll create another hook. So we can just say use top stories, .ts, and for this hook, I've also pre-written some code here, but I'll take you through it. So essentially, what we're doing now is with this hook, we're creating a fetching state and we're creating an ID state. So then on mount, we'll call this refresh function, which simply fetches the IDs. And then as soon as those IDs are fetched, it gets set into the state. But what's interesting here is that we're also passing a fetch more and a refresh, or returning a fetch more and a refresh function. So these functions now allow us to, as you scroll down and you're reaching the bottom, to fetch the next couple of stories. And the refresh function then allows us to, as you pull down, to then fetch some new stuff. So what does this look like? If we go back to our list, I think I can remove this view. It's just making things messy. So what we'll do now is that we can introduce this hook, so we can remove all of that code. And we can say that we want to use the top stories over here. So now we do have that IDs that we get. We get the refresh function, we get the fetch more, and we get the fetching function. So now to the flat list, we can it has this nice property on refresh, which will then call the refresh function. You want to let it know that it's refreshing by simply saying, okay, it's now fetching. And then if you reach the end, you simply want to call fetch more. So that's quite convenient, right? So now you can see on the left and right, that if you now pull down on Android, you do get a refresh functionality. And on iOS, you also get the refresh functionality. Now, what you should notice here is that this actually looks different between the two platforms. So on Android, you do see that little classic Android thing, and on iOS, you see the classic iOS thing. Now, this is a testament to React Native being like truly native, because these are using native constructs underneath. And at the same time, if you scroll down, hopefully we'll get some more. Yeah, there we go. So now as we're scrolling down, we do make a call to get more items, and they get filled in. So this is quite cool. We could even extend this to say, like, if we can add a list footer component, and we can say if we're fetching, then we'll render a spinner. Otherwise, we just render nothing, and the spinner comes from stack. So now, as we are scrolling down, yeah, we should get a nice spinner over there as we're fetching more stuff. So that's also quite nice. But okay, now we have an app. It's semi-useful, but I want to be able to click on these things, right? So I want to get some more information. I want to actually read the stuff, not just look at some text. So the first thing that we're going to do to make something clickable, because we have this nice touchable opacity component that's provided by React Native. Now this simply makes any component that you wrap it in, well, almost clickable. So again, I just need to import it from the correct place. React Native. So if we now click on these things, yeah, there we go. So on iOS, you can see it makes this nice little animation. Android also does a nice animation. But now we would expect that if we click on something, that we want to navigate to it. So let's add some navigation to our app, shall we? So the first thing that we then need to do is we're going to be making use of React Navigation, as I mentioned earlier. Now, React Navigation requires us to wrap our app inside a navigation container. Now this is, again, it's very similar to the GlueStack UI provider. This is also essentially a provider. It allows the entire app to be able to access any of the navigation states. And we are going to be making use of a stack navigator. So React Navigation provides us with these nice creation functions, and this allows us to create a stack navigator, and then we can use that by just rendering a navigator there, and then we can render a home, essentially a home component, and we'll say the initial root name is home. Now, of course, it's going to complain because this component doesn't really exist, so we'll create a home screen. So we'll create a new folder called screens, add a file here, and then we'll create a home component. And I think that for this home component, we can simply just return this flat list. So we can do return over there. It's complaining about a bunch of stuff. That's okay. And then we'll just reuse that hook. Don't get scared about the errors. They're not real. We'll do that, and we'll import this, and we'll import this. Okay, so now we do actually have a home component, and now we just need to pass that in for the home screen. And there we go. So now we have navigation. So as you can see at the top, we've got a nice home header that's being rendered. So if you change this to, let's say, Fetsa, you can also change that. Then you'll see the header update to Fetsa. You can also do this like on a per component basis. So I think you can just call title Fetsa. So you can, it's a very nice API. You can basically do whatever, but we'll just call it home for now. Now at least we have our first part of navigation in. So of course, when we click on something, we need to navigate to somewhere. So we'll create a new screen, and we'll call it file. We'll call it detailed item.tsx. So here we've got a detailed item. And we'll just return null for now. Actually, let me return a view. Come on. This, and we'll just render some text. Say hello. Okay, so now we have another screen, and then we add that to our stack. Screen, we say this is the detailed item, and we'll call, we'll use that component that we've just created. And actually, let's give the screen a better name. So we'll just call it details. Okay, so now we've added this detailed item to our stack navigator. So going back to our item preview and this touchable opacity that we've added, we can now make use of this onPress function. So now we need to navigate somewhere. So how do we do that? Now, the first thing that I do want to add is some typings. So I'm a major fan of TypeScript. Everything needs to be typed. And I've actually already done that. So we've typed, basically, I've made some types here that type our root stack navigator. So here you can see there's a home screen and there's a detailed item screen. This object just defines the parameters or the properties that can be passed into those screens. So the home screen doesn't take any parameters, and the detailed item, as we'll get later on, will be passing in the title, the type, and the author, etc. So now we can then type this navigator by simply passing in that root stack param list into the stack. And this is nice because now if you do want to add another screen, it'll actually autocomplete the stuff that you have available. So if something is not typed here, you can't add it. And then conversely, this becomes nice because now you can make use of the navigation hook and get a nice typed version of it. So you can call use navigation, you pass in that root stack param list, you say that you are on the home screen, and why is it complaining? Why? Let me just take a look here. Right, because I need another type. So you need the stack screen props type, which comes from React Navigation. So basically, you're just saying that this is a stack screen, and you need the props for it. It's part of the root stack param list, and then that's the home. And in particular, you're accessing the navigation aspect of this. And why are we complaining? Let's see here. Fine. So now we do have the navigation object, so we can just assign that. And now this onPress function can then nicely call the navigation.navigate, and we want to go to the detailed item screen. And now at present, I'll just comment out those types because this is fake news at the moment. So we'll just say detailed item is undefined. So now if we click on any of these, it takes us to this navigation screen. And what is super nice is, again, you can see at the top, both of these are native constructs. So our app feels native. Even though we're just writing one code base, we end up with an app that feels native on both iOS and on Android. It's pretty cool, right? So now, of course, we don't want to be saying hello if you click anywhere. So now let's pass in some parameters. So I can uncomment this, and then immediately we do have some complaining going on here by the compiler, which is why I love types. Now you can simply just add in the things that you do need to add for this navigation to occur. So we're simply going to be passing in the title, the type, and the author and the URL of the item that is being clicked on. So now what makes this nice is if you go to the detailed item. Now again, here, instead of making use of the use navigation hook for a screen, it has actually direct access to the navigation prop. So here you can just say that you've got a stack screen prop from the root stack param list. And again, this is the detailed item. And this allows us access to the root object and also to the navigation object. We're not going to be using the navigation object here since we can already go back. But this root object now gives us access to whatever is being passed in. So we can get access to the title, the type, the author, and the URL. So just to demonstrate, we'll quickly just render all of those here. Type, author, and URL. Now, if we click on one of these, we get access to all of those things. So now all that is left for us to do is to make this look nice. And luckily, that's simple enough. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'll just add a box from GlueStack. This is essentially just a nice kind of abstracted view. We'll give it some padding of 8, and then we'll add a vertical stack, and we'll add a heading. All of these things are from GlueStack, so it just goes to show you how nice a component library can be. So we'll render the title in a heading, give it a divider. I don't want margin all over, just want a vertical margin. And then we'll render the text. Let me just make sure, yes, this is correct. We'll also align this to be center. So this should already look a bit better. Now, if you click on one of those, we can see both Android and iOS already looks quite nice. And we can see how it correctly, shows the appropriate stuff that we're clicking on. And now the last thing that we do want to add to make our app nicely functional is if whatever is being passed into the screen does have a URL. So this URL is typed as string or undefined. So I'm just checking if the URL exists, because for some reason the Hacker News API sometimes doesn't return a URL. But we'll simply be able to render that inside a web view. Now, web view is pretty much like an iframe from the web world. Now, it essentially just renders a URL and makes it nicely viewable in our app. So we can just pass in our URL from the story there and render that inside a web view. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's see here. So if you click on one of these, let me just reload the app. Sometimes when you're adding a new component, you do need to do a bit of a hard reload. So now, if we open this, of course it'll crash. Why is my app not working? Let's see here. Continue. This is a bit annoying. But anyway, let's just render the URL here to make sure that there is actually something. That must be text. Come now. Yeah, there we go. So our thing is, it is there. I don't know why this web view likes to crash now and why Android is completely hanging. But of course, that's how life goes when you're doing live demos. Is you end up with a crash that didn't happen when you tested it out earlier today. Let's give it one last try. Okay, so that works. Do this. There we go. So now, whoa. So now we do finally have our web view that is being rendered. And that's our app. So now we do have a basic Hacker News reader app. So you can scroll here, it opens the article that you want to read. You can go back, you can scroll down. It loads more as you scroll. You can open this one. And now, of course, you can build this out as you want. So, of course, we're missing comments at the moment, etc. But this should give you a basic idea of how React Native works. And I hope that it nicely also demonstrated how you do get the native functionality, even though you're just writing a single code base. So that's it for the demo. So the last thing that I have to show you is some further reading, as I've promised. So the first thing that I wanted to refer you to again is Expo and EAS. These are, everything that I've done now was built using Expo, and it was the thing that's responsible for hot reloading, etc. Of course, again, React Navigation. It's what allowed us to get a stack navigator, and we were able to, with React Navigation, you also get like bottom tab navigators. It's a very powerful library. Glue stack, as I've shown, is quite nice for getting nicely styled components. And then something that we didn't touch upon is native modules. Now, I've spoken a lot about how native React Native is. Now, native modules allow you to write actual native code. So these are modules that you're basically writing in Java or in Objective-C, and you're communicating them via that bridge. So this is how you can get custom native functionality. So you're not constrained by whatever is available. You can create your own. And then the last thing is the new architecture. Now, I've spoken about the bridge a couple of times. The new architecture is actually getting rid of that bridge. So this is like, as I've mentioned, the biggest kind of performance bottleneck in React Native is this bridge. Now, what the new architecture does is it gets rid of that bridge and allows the JavaScript and native layers to communicate via C++ interfaces. It's very interesting, very, very cool, but it's still experimental at this point, so it's not the default yet. But I know the plan is, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years for it to become the default way. And that's it. I am open to any questions. If you're too shy to ask questions, you can reach me on LinkedIn or Twitter. The code that I've just shared is available on this GitHub repository that you can see here. The slides is also available on a GitHub page. And yeah, that's about it that I have to show you.
Great. Thanks so much, Frikkie. That was really awesome. Great to see how well, I'm not going to say easy, but I remember years and years and years ago, like my company, we used to do mobile app development, and it was let's build 2 separate applications for each thing, because there weren't these frameworks. Yeah, so it's made a huge difference.
It's the strides that React Native have made in the past 5 years even has been incredible. I remember, I think around 8 years ago, like you only had like Cordova or something to work with, and it was essentially web views. It was really far off from actual native code. And yeah, with the current state that React Native is in, I cannot see how there's a reasonable justification to do native development over something like Flutter or React Native. So it's come a long way.
Great. There is one question around tooling.
Yes, which VS Code plugins? Yeah, this is a good question. Does Copilot count? So I don't have specific plugins that I use apart from just like the typical React and then the TypeScript plugins. That's kind of standard. There is Expo actually does provide some plugins for it. I haven't played around with it much, but basically it does allow you to do debugging and running from within VS Code, etc. But unfortunately, I do not have a specific tool for VS Code or plugin that I can recommend.
Thanks. This is a general question to me. Yes, it will be archived on the YouTube channel where it will stay. It usually takes about 24 hours for Google to process everything and check that we aren't publishing anything we shouldn't be. So it should be available tomorrow. We always share the link on ZA Tech in both the front end and the Feta channels, but we'll also share it in mobile dev channels on there as well, I think, and React also. Cool. Are there any other questions from anyone? There's a comment. Not sure what.
Get server-side props or get static props. Yeah. Okay. So this is not related to React Native. I think this is specific for Next.js. I'm not sure if this is even a React thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, get server-side props and get static props. That's typically for web development. There's no such thing for React Native.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah, everything is app side, so you don't have
Thoughts on React Native versus Flutter? And then
yeah.
following up on that, coincidentally, React Native seems much easier than Flutter.
Yeah, so much to my own embarrassment, I actually haven't tried creating an app with Flutter. So all I have to go on is hearsay, but I do know that I've read at least the technicalities behind it, and there are a lot of similarities. The biggest difference being that Flutter has as a complete as its own rendering engine. Of course, uses Dart. So why I prefer React Native over Flutter is simply because it allows you to much more easily move between mobile development and web development and even backend. There's a lot less context switching that takes place. And the intricacies that you learn about the rendering lifecycle in React Native is also applicable for React. So it just makes the amount of things that you can do a bit, let's say, wider or broader. But apart from that, I think performance-wise, a lot of people like to say that Flutter is more performant. I mean, I think if you're doing like the extreme, then probably there's an argument to be made. But for normal apps, it's all negligent.
Cool. Thank you for that. This is just a question out of my own curiosity, because I've never worked with React Native before, but with React a lot. Is it maintained by the same team, or is it a separate? How does that work? Do you know?
Yeah, so no, it's a separate team. So React Native uses React, so it's one of your dependencies. So if you're upgrading your React Native version, you're also upgrading your React version. So you also get access to stuff like the suspense rendering, etc.
Yeah.
But no, it's separate teams, and the project behind React Native is actually quite intricate. Like, I can highly recommend diving into the repository and just taking a look at all of the things that's going on there. But as I've mentioned, there's like all of these mappings that need to take place. So for example, that view component that I've shown, that maps to like a native UI thing for iOS and a native UI thing for Android. So the team has basically created these native components, which maps to all of the standard components that's provided with React Native.
Very nice. You've definitely piqued my interest.
Yes, go check it out. We need more mobile apps.
And I presume, sorry if this is a silly question, but I mean, I noticed you were using, your styling. You were just using, margin vertical. I think it was margin vertical. And is that from a component library, or is that something native to?
Yeah.
React?
So good question. Maybe I apologize that I didn't touch on this, but so React Native doesn't use CSS. It uses style sheets, it's called. Now, it's very, very close to CSS. I think basically, I'm not sure how much is the percentage overlap, but it's the same thing. You're also using flex and margin and et cetera, et cetera.
Right, yeah.
But it does allow you to do inline styling. So on a component, you can pass in like a styles prop, and then you can do styling with that. And what you saw me doing in the demo was the component libraries in general like to put these styling properties or the styling object as like props, as top level props on the component itself. So it just makes it easier to just say, okay, this thing has a margin of 8 instead of creating a style sheet and passing that in. But React Native also supports styled components, which I know is quite popular. So there's also CSS for React Native libraries that you can use. So that gap has also been bridged.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I think doesn't look like it. I've posted the links there to the repo for the demo code and actually I've posted them twice. No.
No.
Oh, here we go. One more. Any tips for a web developer to shift careers to a mobile developer role? That's a great question.
Yo, that's a tough question. I don't know. I haven't done this in 5 years. Let me think. I think the biggest thing that you can do to get started is, of course, doing a couple of side projects. I think playing around, especially trying to see if it's something that you enjoy. It's super easy to just build a to-do app, or as I've just shown, a Hacker Newsreader app. It's really you don't have to build something unique. You don't have to build the next unicorn. Just play around with it and see, firstly, if it's something that you do enjoy. Also bearing in mind that mobile development is a different kind of worms than web development.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I'm hesitant to give advice here because I don't know if it's good advice, but I guess if you have a bit of a portfolio built up in side projects, you don't need a lot, like 2 or 3 should probably be fine. Probably start looking for consultancies that do mobile work specifically. I'm not sure of which ones exactly, but I'm sure there are some available. Otherwise, you can join. There's some React Native Discord channels, or Expo as a Discord channel, and you can check for job postings there, or you can pick up some freelance work or whatever. There's a ton of work out there.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're exactly on the hour, 1 minute over.
Yes.
I want to just say thanks again, Frikkie, for the talk. That was really great. I certainly learned a lot of things I didn't know, and great to see the strides that are being made in this space. Thanks to everyone for joining us. As I said earlier, the recording will be available. We'll share it in the usual places. Please share it far and wide. The more people we get to watch the videos, the better. Not that we get anything from it, it's just nice. Next meetup on the 26th for the CSS workshop. If you're interested in that, sign up on Meetup. Cool. Thanks all.
Great. Thank you.